Happy Samhain! Hey friends, so I know that today is a day that most people celebrating Samhain normally drink their mead, but I tend to procrastinate through the season. I am relatively new to beekeeping in that I've only been doing it 6 or 7 years, and there's always something that goes on every year that has taught me to, when I get to the point where I can harvest honey, I'm going to reserve it in case there's something like a bear attacks the hives late in the season. I can offer the honey back to help build up recovering hives. So with that being said, I'm always late to process anything that we do with our honey. And Samhain is the day that I actually make our mead, and we mull it and drink it on the winter solstice with our Yule log burning. And that's just the tradition in our family home on how we do mead or Melomel. And today I'm going to re-explore a couple of my mead recipes. Once upon a time when I first started making mead, which got me into the beekeeping, I found this Egyptian recipe which was relatively simple, and I went with it mostly because of the simplicity, but also I actually probably should have resource checked this to know why it's an Egyptian recipe, other than they were one of the first beekeepers or the people to domesticate bees or work with them, and then they made their wine from it, and they had to collect a wild yeast to do their fermentation process, and it normally resulted in a somewhat dry but still sweet mead. And I know that there's a lot of quick ways to really go about really doing one or the other, and I like to go right down the middle on this, where it's relative to 1 gallon of water to 2.5 pounds of honey, and then I ferment. But with my Melomel, I play around with a couple of recipes, and the first year I did this, I picked a couple of different fruits to work with, and the thing that surprised both Caleb and I is the fact that the weird one that I ended up doing was the one that we liked the best, and that was the one that we put kiwi in with our mead, and it was delicious. So I will show you just my quick little setup, and as you can see, I already have water that's going, and I have my scale out, and I've got a couple of jugs ready to go, as well as the produce for my Melomel. So I like to get my water up to about 90 to 100 degrees before I cut in and stir and break down the honey. I don't want to destroy any of the benefits to the honey. And actually, as you can see, working with raw honey, it is going to take a little bit longer just to work, so the heat of the warm water bath will be beneficial. And then I just add it to a gallon jug, which we use to ferment, or we sit on the porch and have a little band going after we're done indulging. But it's just going to be a relatively quick process. So if you want, you can watch, and yeah. So if you're wondering what 2.5 pounds of honey looks like, by volume, it's roughly 2.5 cups. And then I'm literally just going to add my honey. So, this year I am going to be repeating my regular mead and the mead with kiwi. I'm going to play around with different volumes of kiwi to figure out which is the best to replicate. And I'm also going to experiment with some new things. One is some Vermont maple syrup. I am going to also play around with the volume with that. And the mead, or the Melomel with kiwi, was really successful. And I'm going to think that it's the potassium that's maybe affecting that in some way. So I'm going to play around with different volumes of banana. And then as like my weird one this year is I'm going to play around with some bell pepper. I know that with wine, you sometimes get notes of like bell pepper. So I'm going to introduce the sugars from a bell pepper into my Melomel and see how that turns out in a couple of months. So the thing that I do want to talk about is, and I've talked about this before in my 60-day system, because it's a part of my system of being able to engage and embrace in our family traditions and making sure that I am present and not feeling like I'm hindered by anything that's always ongoing and whatever those emotional and mental health obstacles tend to be by having these other things. And I forget the last tradition that we did. It may have been sharing the autumn equinox, which is Maybon, and I think maybe that one's the last one. I will say that for Samhain, this is not like a big, I know that it's supposed to be our version of New Year's, and it's pretty chill around our house, and we don't do a big Samhain. It's just because we do, I guess we're more into our mid-season or wheel of the year things. We tend to do the solstices and the equinoxes with the most excitement, even though they tend to be the second thing that falls within each of the 4 seasons. But I am embracing it, and I will say that for Samhain, I'm usually this is the time of the year where the realization of winter coming makes the outstanding things seem extra heavy, extra stressful, and autumn is a fun and beautiful and romantic time for us, but there is that moment of pause before it comes of, well, what can I hurry up and get done? What is the priority? And I don't feel that particular column of stress this year, which is a good thing. So that is why I am just sharing what we do for Samhain this year and why I'm including it in my 60-day systems, where when you talk about refining your system and making sure that it's working for you, things that used to be before addressing your system did work for you. So it's part of the revisiting and restructuring things. You get to identify what has worked well prior to even revisiting this topic, and then dial into those things. Continue to include them because they've proven to work in your life. And celebrating the wheel of the year and Samhain and making mead is something that works for me. And I'm not going to be really particularly great at sharing what it is I'm doing, but maybe I will get into, and this is something I'll have to think about as one of those things at the end of my system on continuing to vlog, right? What am I sharing? What am I educating? And what's making things simple and happy and cozy for me? And maybe detail them a little bit more in a blog post. Would that be helpful? Let me know. And I will get back to prep.
I'm not quite sure which one was which originally. I do have 1 1/3 pound of red bell pepper. Now, I picked red bell pepper because they are the sweetest out of all of them. As you know, the green ones are the ones that are not quite ripe yet, and they have a little bit more of a crisp nature to them. And the red ones tend to be a little bit sweeter, and then the sliding scale in between. I am going to do, obviously, my original control group is the Mead, and I'm not quite sure how many times I will have repeated that in this video by now, but I am going to do 2 different versions, one where it's just going to be 1 pound, and then the other one is going to be 1/3 of a pound. And what's great about this is I am just cutting things down enough to fit into the jug. So I'm actually going to prep these very crudely because I am going to save the membrane and the seeds as part of the fermentation process. The flavors and the flavor profiles around the membrane and the seeds and the membranes around the seed itself are things that I want to include in this little mead experiment. So the only thing I'm technically going to intentionally remove is the stem. And I'm just going to take my jug and add my bell peppers. Now, obviously with any fruit, the sugar content in this particular fruit, while it's 1/3 of a pound by weight, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a stable amount of sugar in here. So even with my experiment, it's going to be a little bit variable. This one clearly is a lot of bell pepper, and that's part of the experiment. Obviously, as it ferments, it will break down and get smaller, and then probably be a pain in the A to clean out the jug during the bottling process when this is empty, but I am super excited about it. So this is what my mead looks like at about 100 degrees, and I'm just going to start pouring it into the gallon jugs that are right next to it. So I do have these already bought and pre-measured out, so I feel like my maple syrup is going to be the easiest, well, except for the straight up regular mead. But I'm going to do a 12.5 maple syrup and then a 25.5 ounce maple syrup to the regular recipe of the 2.5 pounds of honey per 1 gallon. And I'm going to fill these up to their 1 gallon mark, and then the rest that's diffused over will just become part of a regular mead fermentation. And then this one is going to be my 25 ounce maple syrup fermentation. So we'll let this one hang out, and then we'll come back to these. This is what they look like, already different varying colors of amber. What surprises me most is this one is the one that had the like the half amount of maple syrup, but it looks the darkest. And that might be a light issue because there's not a whole lot of light over here. But even in comparison, you can see how different honey flows have different colors. And this one feels so much lighter in contrast to this one, even if they have the same amount of light, because that one matches almost the plain mead, which is this fill-over one. So this one is the one that was made with the volume spillover from these four. And I will say this one smells amazing. I'm anticipating it being some sort of a dessert type of, well, I wonder what you call it if it's not made with fruits. I know that spices is something, and then fruits is melomel. I wonder what maple syrup is technically called. So my melomel hybrid, and then the bell pepper. This one smelled really interesting. The bell pepper really bloomed out, and the honey with it, like the honey water and the bell pepper, smelled so promising. And then the one with just the third of a pound of bell pepper smelled really nasty. So I am super curious to see how this actually turns out. So if you are new to watching, I'd like you to come back, so please subscribe. Remember to keep growing from where you are, and I'll share more with you soon. Tschüss! It's the morning after, and I'm putting some of these away, but I put a pause in it because I realized I should probably label these. And so you can see, like, this is one of my banana ones, and I actually decided, because we still haven't had a hard frost yet, which is shocking for November, I pulled some lemon balm as like a rogue experiment I wasn't planning on, but it looks so healthy and beautiful, and I thought I'd play around with that. But these are the ones from yesterday, and the most active one is obviously the one with the most red bell pepper in it. This one is the one with the pound, and then this is my maple syrup one, also pretty active. And then arguably the second most active is this one with the least amount of maple syrup, which just sort of goes to show you that the different water ratio and the weight of honey and the sugar content and all of that, you can measure and be upfront about a lot of this stuff, but with home brewing, a lot of this is just a rough, crude experiment.